Welcome to an episode of Behind the Scenes, a weekly program unveiling the biggest political developments in Somali politics. I'm Sultan Mohammed, your host here on HORUFADHI Media. On this week's program, the appointment of Abdikarim Guled as the new Villa Somalia Envoy for Somaliland affairs has drawn criticism at a time where the conflict in Las Anod is intensifying. What does this appointment mean? What will it achieve? And what was previously achieved? This is the topic on the program today. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media. Also, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media Group's second channel, known as HORUFADHI TV, where you are currently watching this program, and where you can find other exclusive programs, such as the African Weekly Roundup and Mahe Saleh, among others. And last but not least, do follow myself, Sultan Mohammed, Sulaiman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider HORUFADHI Media team on our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Let's get straight into the news. As the conflict in Las Anod intensifies, with Hargeisa concentrating all its political and military efforts to recapture the city, President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud has appointed another presidential special envoy, this time for Somaliland affairs. Mohamud appointed close ally and former Galmudug state president Abdikarim Guled as his special envoy. But why Abdikarim Guled? For those that do not know, for almost 2 years between 2012 and 2014, Mr. Guled served as the Federal Minister of Interior Affairs, having facilitated dialogue between the Somaliland Regional Separatist Government led by Ahmed Siranyo and the Transitional Federal Government of Somalia, which eventually would transform to the Federal Government of Somalia in 2012. Guled led a delegation of senior federal ministers as well as ministers that hail from the SSC region to attend talks with a Somaliland delegation in Turkey, which ended in 2014. Now, both sides agreed on a number of logistical and security concerns, having reached agreements on economic and security cooperation, for instance, the facilitation of the smooth transition of international resources and funds from Mogadishu to Hargeisa, as the latter is considered part of the Somali nation and not internationally recognized. Ultimately, the talks drew to a close with a pledge by both sides to enter phase 3 of talks and plans for the creation of a joint committee to oversee this process that would be seated in Turkey, none of which ever panned out. Now, interestingly, while Abdikarim Guled informed the media that the talks were heading to the positive direction and where concessions were being made on both sides, the then separatist Somaliland Foreign Minister Mohammed Bihi Yonis outlined that the secessionism of Somaliland was not up for discussion and would never be. Now, talks have not kicked off since. So let's actually take a look back at how these talks began and what was initially achieved. Now, the idea of talks between separatist Somaliland and the Somali federal government began in 2012 during the London conference, in which international stakeholders, alongside the Somali government, discussed the future of the nation. Now, the communique outlined that the conference recognized the need for the international community to support dialogue between the two sides to help move Somalia forward. And the first meeting between the two sides occurred in London. This was followed by a meeting between former President Sharif Sheikh Ahmed and former Somaliland leader Ahmed Mohamed Mahmoud Siranyo in Dubai. Finally, there will be a meeting between the newly elected president of the new federal government of Somalia, Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, and Siranyo in Djibouti, before delegations representing both sides met in Turkey to further advance talks, which were then led by Abdikarim Guled, which was Interior Minister of Somalia. Now, during the presidency of Farmajo, talks didn't kick off, despite pledges made by President Farmajo during his election campaign and his tenure. The main reason for this stems from a number of previous issues and new ones that created further friction between the two sides. So let's take a look at some of the issues highlighted on the table between the two sides. Now, Somaliland points out that in previous talks, both sides agreed to share airspace between them, with Hargeisa being given authority over the Somaliland region. However, upon the return of the control of Somali airspace to the country, the entirety of the responsibility was transferred to the federal Somali Civil Aviation Authority, which has angered, of course, the Hargeisa government. Another major issue revolves around the Berbera Port Agreement, which was initially rejected by the federal government as bypassing all international political and legal frameworks, because the UAE and Ethiopia signed agreements for the port with Somaliland without any consultation with Mogadishu. Now, both Somali national law and international law both state that Somaliland is de jure part of the Somali Federal Republic, and therefore both nations legally would be obliged to go to the federal government of Somalia before signing any further agreements with Somaliland. And finally, separatist Somaliland leadership highlighted the injustice committed in northern regions during the civil war and the lack of accountability for these war crimes. What makes matters worse is that the Somali government has not been stable for the past few years with constant government changes, and everybody that follows Somali politics is probably aware that whenever there is a government change, there is a new ministers, new presidents, new advisors, and ultimately new policies that are not in line with the previous administration. For instance, the 2021 period saw the near capitulation of the federal government when militia loyal to the opposition attacked government forces in the capital during the election disputes. And finally, the biggest elephant in the room remains the incomplete constitution. The reality is that the Somali federal constitution is only provincial in nature, that actually is yet to be completed. For instance, the power sharing dynamic within the federal system remains ambiguous, with resource allocation continuing to create friction within the federal government, as the federal government in Mogadishu and the federal member state of Puntland continue to have disputes. For instance, the newly created upper house has yet to have a universally defined legal purpose. And these are just some of the constitutional issues within the current federal system that Somalia has. The fact of the matter is that the issue of Somaliland is part of the greater issue in Somalia, which is a lack of trust between the people of the nation and the government. Since the civil war that saw devastation, destruction, distrust and animosity, Somali clans have resorted to creating miniature states that represent clan interests, which eventually would form the federal system we have today. While talks regarding the particular issues raised by Somaliland ought to be rectified here and now, other regions also have a right to raise concerns about their own issues over the past 3 decades, including southwest state Somalia. Ultimately, Somalia is attempting to create a universally accepted constitution and rebuild trust between not only its people, but also its people and its government. And to do so, it must incorporate the entirety of the nation on the issue of secessionism and the incorporation of Somaliland into the federal system. We need to differentiate between issues Somaliland has had with the central government, which are unique to itself, Hargeisa, wherever other region there is within Somaliland. But at the same time, there are other issues that are being discussed by the two sides that don't just concern Somaliland. Also, they concern other federal member states, because if Somaliland were to accept the terms, it would become a federal member state, and Somaliland cannot, logically or legally have special rights over other regions, because then that would create even more division within the nation. Now, back to the announcements made by Villa Somalia. And the decision by the president, particularly during this period, has created a political whirlwind in Somalia. Many have questioned why the president has decided to make such a move when the situation in Somaliland is worsening by the day. For instance, elections have been delayed since November 2022, with bloodshed seen when opposition parties attempted to rally support against the extension by the Bihi regime. The war in Las Anod continues to intensify, with over 200,000 people displaced and dozens killed or wounded, including women and children, despite calls from Mogadishu and the international community to end the violence and for Somaliland to withdraw from the Sol region to enable talks. The Bihi regime derailed the Addis Ababa talks following the declaration of a new offensive against the SSC Khartoum Council a week and a half ago, which resulted in more intense attacks by Somaliland as the desperation to capture the city grows in Hargeisa. Now, while Bihi has welcomed the new special envoy, many, including the Puntland state government, have highlighted that the decision could trample on the self-determination of the SSC Khartoum region, which called on Villa Somaliland to incorporate it under its direct control, which is yet to happen. Somaliland considers the entirety of the SSC Khartoum region as part of its jurisdiction, despite both the federal government in Mogadishu and the international community legally classifying Somaliland as part of Somalia. The region has acted as a de facto separate state and will most likely place conditions on any talks with Somalia, including the need for Mogadishu to recognize the SSC region as part of Somaliland. Reacting to the announcement, the SSC Khartoum Council welcomed talks to advance the unity of the nation. However, the leadership made clear that it would not be part of any talks between Somaliland and Mogadishu, as it does not consider itself part of the Somaliland separatist agenda in any way or form whatsoever. Ultimately, many have highlighted that Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud could have easily created a new special envoy for Seoul to not only respond to the political request by the SSC Khartoum Council to increase federal government presence and control in the region, but also help support the thousands of civilians that have fled the conflict and are now stranded in IDP camps in neighboring Somali states and Puntland, many having no water or shelter. And for this exact reason, many have criticized Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud of not taking a serious and strong stance against what is happening in Las Anod. Now, despite sending clan and delegation to Las Anod, the delegation failed to meet the Bihi government and actually achieved nothing anything fruitful with the SSC Council, clarifying that it did not reach any ceasefire agreement with the delegation despite rumors circulating on social media. Indeed, it is evident that the Mahmoud administration has taken a weak and nonchalant stance on the conflict and the underlying issue of Somali unity. Some have even accused Mahmoud of siding with Behe following the wedding event both attended, where they were pictured together smiling, and now the decision right now to create a special envoy while ignoring the calls from Las Anod. While I always welcome talks to rectify the issues between Somaliland and the rest of Somalia, it is the issue of SSC Khatamo that must be rectified first before any talks can begin. While Somalis will always welcome talks to rectify the issues between Somaliland and the rest of Somalia, the issue of the SSC Khatamo must be rectified first before any talks can begin, and that includes the withdrawal of all Somaliland forces from Sol and the recognition of the region by the federal government of Somalia.